Hello, friends. In this lesson, we're going to look at the passive voice. What is the passive voice? The passive voice is a sentence form where the object of a verb is the subject of the sentence. So as you know, in English, in a sentence, usually the subject comes first. So the government closed the school. Closed is my verb. The government is the subject of the verb, and the school is the object of the verb, which means that the action, closing, the subject is the one doing the closing. So who closed the school? The government did. What did the government close? The government closed the school. So the receiver of the action is the object. This is the standard order for every sentence in English: subject, verb, and then object if there is an object. What the passive voice does is it changes it so that the object of the action comes first in the sentence. So the school was closed. Again, closed is my verb, but I've added something. I've added this was. And then the school, which was the object, gets moved to the subject place. So the object actually becomes the subject. So it gets a little bit confusing to keep calling things subject and object when we're talking about passive voice. So instead of calling the subject the thing that does the verb, we call it the agent. So the passive voice is formed by moving the object to the subject place. So again, the government closed the school. Closed is the verb. School is the object, and government is the subject. So if we want to make the passive voice, we're going to move this object to the subject place. So the school closed. Now, we're not going to stop here. So we move the object to the subject place, and then we add a form of the be verb before the main verb. So we're going to add a be verb right there. Now we're talking about the past, so we're going to use was. So the school was closed. Now I know that the school is the thing that the action happened to. So we're using the past participle form of the main verb. Now in this case, closed it's a regular verb. It's the ed form of the verb. So the past participle is just the ed form. So we didn't have to change that at all. But for some other verbs, we're going to have to change to a different form. So let's take another example. The janitor cleans the school. Cleans is my verb. Now it's in the present simple. We see that S there. The janitor, the one doing the action, is the subject, and the school is the object. Now, if I want to make this passive voice, I'm basically going to get rid of this, and I'm going to move this over to the subject place and change the verb. All right, so the school cleans. Now, that doesn't make any sense because the school can't clean. So we need to add that be verb in there. The school is cleans because we're in the present. Now, this still doesn't make sense. The school is cleans. We need to change this to the past participle. The school is cleaned. There we go. Now we have the passive voice. So the school is cleaned. The person who does the action, which I said we call the agent or the doer, is usually left out. And that's another thing about the passive voice is we usually leave out who does the action. And we'll talk about the reasons why at the end. But the agent can be added at the end of the sentence using the word by. So we can say the school is cleaned by the janitor. But we don't have to say this part here. We can if we want to. Usually the passive voice is just this part. Sometimes we can use get instead of be as the helping verb, but it sounds a little bit more informal. So the school is cleaned by the janitor. We can say the school gets cleaned by the janitor. So instead of is, we're using gets. But that's usually more in spoken language. It's more informal. So the passive voice can be used with any verb tense. We could use it with the past simple, like the school was closed. Now I know it's the past simple because I have to look at the helping verb here. Was is my helping verb, and closed is my main verb. Now I know this is past simple because I'm using the word was, but I can also use the present simple. So this is the present simple passive. Is my helping verb, closed is my main verb. The school will be closed. So you see with each of these, The only thing I've changed is the helping verb in order to change the verb tense. I'm not changing the main verb. The main verb is staying the same. See that? So the school was closed, the school is closed, the school will be closed in the future. The school is going to be closed. So there's my helping verb. The school had been closed, past perfect. The school has been closed, present perfect. The school will have been closed, future perfect. Ooh, that's a tricky one. Or we can use modals. The school can be closed. So instead of changing the be verb here, we just leave it as the base form and we add can before it. So can be closed. So again, we have the be verb plus the past participle, and we're just adding the modal there. The school could be closed. The school would be closed. The school might be closed. The school may be closed. The school should be closed. All of these are passive voice. They're just different verb tenses or modal forms of the passive voice. Or we can use the past progressive. The school was being cleaned. So here, remember we have the be verb plus the past participle of the main verb, cleaned. Now the be verb is going to be the ing form here because we're using the progressive. So was being closed. Present progressive is being cleaned. Sorry, was being cleaned is being cleaned. Future progressive will be being cleaned. That sounds a little bit funny, but you could do it. Now, why do we use the passive voice? We use it for a few different reasons. First reason, to focus on the object. So, my phone was stolen. Here I'm focusing on what was stolen. Not my car. My car wasn't stolen. My house wasn't stolen. My credit card wasn't stolen. My phone was stolen. So I'm focusing on what was stolen, the object, my phone. We can also use passive voice because we don't know the agent, the one who did the action. For example, my phone was stolen. These sentences are the same. My phone was stolen. My phone was stolen. So the first one, I'm just focusing on what was stolen. The second one here, I'm focusing on, I don't know who did it. So I'm just focusing on what happened. And I'm leaving out who did it. So I can't say by somebody, right? I could say my phone was stolen by somebody or somebody stole my phone, but I don't really know. So I can just leave it off because I'm focusing on what happened. Because we don't care about who the agent is, for example, the agent is obvious. Now, for example, I can say the person who stole it was arrested. Now, only the police arrest people, so I don't have to say the person who stole it was arrested by the police because it's obvious who arrested them. So I can just say the person who stole it was arrested because I'm focusing on what happened, not who did it. We can also use passive voice to focus on the action or the process. So this is kind of like focusing on the verb. So I could say the phone was made in China. So here I'm focusing on this part. But it was designed in California. So you see I'm contrasting was made and was designed. So the process, what happened, I'm focusing on the action here. So it was made in China, but it was designed in California. Now let's look at some real texts here with these. So if I say my phone was stolen, this is the kind of passive voice you'll see in the newspaper when there's a story of a crime that happened usually, or even with the weather. The focusing on the action or process, you'll see the passive voice used like this a lot in kind of scientific or technical writing, because we're not focusing on who did it. Whether it's a scientist or an inventor or somebody, we're not focusing on who did it, we're focusing on what happened. So the action or the process. We can also use the passive voice to be polite. For example, this mistake needs to be fixed. So needs to be fixed, there's my verb. This sounds more polite than saying you need to fix this mistake, because that sounds too direct and too rude. Now, if I'm at work and somebody made a mistake and I'm not in charge of that person, or maybe it's my boss even, I could just say, oh, this mistake needs to be fixed, because then I'm not focusing on who did it. So it's a little bit more polite. It's like you're ignoring who made the mistake and just focusing on what needs to be fixed. But we can also use it kind of in the same way to avoid blame when we're the ones who did something wrong. So we can say mistakes were made. And this has actually gotten used or been said by people in the government. So mistakes were made. Saying I made some mistakes would make people angry at me. So I just change it to mistakes were made, because then I leave off the information about who made the mistake. So we don't have to focus on that. Mistakes were made. All right, so that's just a quick introduction to the passive voice. Now you can go out and practice, and I say a good place to go practice is just to read the newspaper. Thanks for watching.